The first boom shook my windows. A rusted container hovered over my fence, dangling from a Komatsu crane like a steel blade. That's when Beatrice Crowley, the new HOA president, burst onto her patio in a neon robe, screaming my name as the shadow erased her precious view. The container dropped thud, making the ground jump. Neighbors rushed out, sirens wailed. Beatrice yelled that I was building a toxic fortress, but the second container was already rising toward the sky. Then the city inspector stepped in, stared at the wall forming behind me, and asked me, "Mr. Hale, why are you doing this?" 4 days earlier, I'd come home from a contract meeting in Denver and felt my stomach drop before I even stepped out of my truck. The entire stretch of my 22-year privacy hedge, 18 feet tall, was gone. Not trimmed, not shaped, erased. Stumps lined the soil like a row of broken bones. And Beatrice Crowley was already waiting. She stood on her balcony with a chilled glass of rosé, smiling down at me like she'd just improved the neighborhood. Beatrice was the kind of HOA president who believed her taste was the law of the land. Well, she called Ravenmont Ridge finally has the view it deserves. I demanded to know who gave her permission. She didn't blink. I used the HOA Enhancement Fund to remove an eyesore. You're welcome. Her entire motive fit in one sentence, she believed. Clearing my hedge would raise her home value by $350,000. And because Beatrice thought anything that benefited her was automatically for the community, she assumed I'd simply accept the damage. I wouldn't. I told her she'd trespassed and destroyed my property. She waved her hand like swatting a fly. "Don't bother suing," she said. "Plants grow back, eventually." What she didn't realize, and what I didn't bother explaining, is that I run a logistics company. I deal with permits, structures, and heavy equipment every day. If she wanted a battle of property lines and regulations, she had chosen the worst possible opponent. She just didn't know it yet. The morning after that little balcony speech, the first shot she fired was taped to my front door. Bright orange notice. Community view improvement violation. According to Beatrice, my remaining vegetation, stumps, and debris were dragging down the visual standard of Ravenmont Ridge. I hadn't even had time to rent a chipper, and she was already calling my wrecked hedge an offense against the neighborhood. At the bottom, in her perfect looping handwriting, she'd added a note, "Please comply quickly. The community is finally breathing again." That same afternoon, my inbox pinged with a mass HOA email. She'd copied the entire street. Due to a long-neglected boundary, she wrote, "The board has taken emergency action to restore our natural views. Further non-compliance by certain owners will be addressed. No names." She didn't need to write mine. Everyone knew whose destroyed hedge was in the attached photo. I stared at my computer screen, jaw tight. I work from home most mornings, dispatching trucks and routing freight all over 3 states. My house is supposed to be the one place I'm not under anyone's camera, radio, or clipboard. Apparently, Beatrice had decided that ended at my property line. I deleted the email, walked out back, and looked at the raw, open stretch between our houses. If she thought that little public shaming was going to make me bow, she'd badly misread her target. 2 days later, she stopped pretending this was just about paperwork. I was on a call with the driver when I saw movement at the edge of my yard. I glanced out the kitchen window and froze. Beatrice was standing on my side of the line, high heels, sinking into the dirt, holding a laser tape measure and a clipboard. She didn't even look up when I opened the back door. "You're trespassing," I said. "I'm verifying grade and sightlines," she replied, like she was reading a weather report. She pointed the laser across my bare yard toward the lake and hillside beyond it, scribbling numbers. "The community guidelines allow me to document encroachments." "There is no encroachment," I said. "There's just land you don't own." She finally turned, giving me that calm, practiced smile I'd already learned to hate. "Mason, you'll want to be careful," she said. "If you try to plant anything that interrupts this corridor, again, the board can issue daily fines. It's easier if you just leave it open." She was standing in my dirt on my side, using my ruined hedge line as her personal survey tripod. I walked over, stopping barely a foot away. "Get off my property," I said quietly. Her smile didn't move, but her eyes hardened. For a second, we just stood there, the empty space between our houses wider than the whole lake behind us. Then she clicked off the laser, stepped back over the line like she was humoring a child, and wrote something else on her clipboard. She didn't need to say it out loud. The message was clear in her mind. My yard was now just the foreground of her view. The next hit cost me real money. Friday, I left before dawn to check on one of our distribution yards across town. When I came back that afternoon, there was a landscaping crew in my backyard. Not at the curb, not on the easement, in my yard. Chainsaws were buzzing through the last remaining trunks. A skid steer was scooping up roots, ripping them from the soil. My drip irrigation line, carefully buried along the hedge years ago, hung in shredded loops from the bucket like plastic spaghetti. "Kill the engine," I shouted. The operator shut it down wide-eyed. "We're with Ravenmont Ridge HOA," he said. "Work order says remove hazardous stumps and level the grade. Paid in advance. Paid." I walked around the side of the house and found the envelope stuck in my mailbox, a maintenance assessment for $2, $200 already debited from my HOA account. No hearing, no warning, just Beatrice deciding my destroyed hedge was now a safety hazard and charging me for the privilege of having it ripped out by strangers. The damage was more than roots and plastic. That hedge had been the one solid line between my life and everyone else's. Now the line was erased twice, first by chainsaw, then by her banking access. I called the number at the bottom of the invoice. Beatrice answered on the second ring, voice sweet. "I saw the crew arrived," she said. "You'll thank me when you see how clean the slope looks." I hung up without replying. If she wanted to play with money and ground, fine. That happened to be where I made my living. The official pressure came the following week. I was in the yard marking new post locations with orange paint when a white SUV with the city seal rolled up to the curb. A man in a collared shirt stepped out, hard hat tucked under his arm, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Hale?" he asked. "Yes. City code compliance. We received a complaint from your homeowners association regarding unpermitted structural plans and potential obstruction of designated view sheds." There it was. She wasn't satisfied with my hedge being gone. She wanted to preempt anything I might build in its place. He glanced at the spray paint marks on the dirt. "Are you planning a fence? I'm planning on getting my privacy back," I said. He sighed. The HOA provided a copy of their view corridor map. "They're concerned you may install something that violates it." Of course they were. Of course she had a view corridor map. He handed me a printed packet of municipal code sections, certain lines highlighted. "Any structure over 6 feet," he said, "needs proper permitting and must comply with sightline regulations. If you apply, the review board will consider both your privacy and their claims." I flipped through the pages, scanning numbers, subsections, cross-references. This wasn't intimidating to me. It felt like Tuesday. I live in a world of weight limits, bridge clearances, dock schedules, and inspection forms. Is there anything in here about what happens, I asked, when someone loses a natural barrier they didn't consent to remove? He hesitated. "If there was a hedge before," he said carefully, "that might change the analysis. The code is complicated." Complicated was fine. Complicated meant loopholes. "I'll read it," I said. "Every word." That night I spread the entire municipal code packet across my kitchen table. Pages bled into pages, setbacks, retaining walls, fence caps, sight triangles at street corners. Then I saw it. Not in the fence section. In noise and nuisance abatement, Section 31. A. Where a residential property has experienced loss of privacy or increased disturbance due to removal of a natural barrier, the owner may install a solid noise mitigation structure up to 32 feet in height along the affected boundary, subject to engineering approval. Solid structure. No mention of wood, no mention of brick, no mention of stone, vinyl, or stucco. Just solid. I read it 3 times slowly. My pulse leveled out in that strange way it does when a decision finally clicks into place. Out back, the slope between my house and the lake glowed faintly under the porch light, bare, exposed, and wide open to Beatrice's windows. In my head, I replaced that empty gap with something else, steel rectangles stacked like giant bricks, locking together the way we'd been locking freight on ships for years. My company yard 15 minutes away had a back corner full of retired containers, too dented for cargo, too rusted for repaint, absolutely perfect for one job being ugly and indestructible in exactly the right spot. I called my yard supervisor. "I need 3 40-foot units," I said, "the worst-looking ones we've got. And I need the Komatsu and 2 Western Stars free Saturday morning." "You building a bunker," he joked. "Something like that," I said. I filed the permit application the next day, attached the engineering sketches, and walked it into the city office myself. When the clerk stamped it approved, I knew there was no going back. Beatrice had taken my hedge because she wanted open sky. On Saturday at 6 a.m., she was going to wake up to find out what it feels like when the sky closes. The first container had barely settled when the neighborhood erupted. Beatrice burst out of her sliding doors like a firework, misfiring her neon robe flapping behind her as she charged toward the fence line. "Mason, stop this. You can't do this." Her voice cracked so sharply, the crane operator looked at me like he wanted confirmation it was safe to keep going. "It's fine," I said. "Lift number 2. the komatsu roared. Chains tightened. A second dented container, this one sun-faded green with rust, blooms along the seams rose into the air. A cluster of neighbors gathered at the street, some pretending to be horrified, others clearly enjoying the show. Beatrice pointed wildly at the crane. "This is illegal. This is a structural nightmare. Someone call the city." "I already did," I said, "for the permit." She froze mid-scream. But before she could react, the sirens she desperately hoped for finally echoed up the hill. 2 patrol cars, a fire truck, and a city code SUV pulled into my driveway. Officers stepped out, hands on belts. The fire captain scanned the towering steel with a face that said he hated being dragged into HOA drama. Then the city inspector, the same one from earlier, walked through my gate, eyes locked on the rising wall. "Mr. Hale," he said, voice steady, "I see construction is underway." Beatrice spun toward him, trembling with outrage. "Shut it down, shut it all down." He didn't answer. Not yet. He wanted facts first. "Mr. Hale," the inspector said, "do you have documentation for this structure?" I handed him the folder. Not rushed, not smug, just calm, because I knew exactly what was in it. Approved engineering sketches, soil compaction analysis, noise trajectory diagrams, and most important, Section 31, highlighted in clean yellow lines. The inspector flipped through the paperwork slowly, methodically. Every page he turned made Beatrice's breathing sharper. She hovered beside him like an angry wasp. "This can't be legal," she snapped. "He's turning our neighborhood into a scrapyard. Look at that thing, it's a health hazard, a safety violation. It's ugly," one neighbor whispered. And loud another added, and honestly someone else murmured, "kind of deserved." The inspector held up a hand. The crowd quieted. He walked to the wall, pressed a palm against the steel, inspected the ground clearance, checked the setback measurements I'd marked earlier. Then he looked at the crane operator, at the spacing between the containers, at the twist-lock alignment. "Mason," he said, "this is built like a modular retaining structure." "Exactly," I replied. Beatrice's voice wavered. You can't possibly allow this." "My view is gone. My home value ruined." The inspector turned to her, expression unreadable. "Mrs. Crowley, you filed a complaint saying your privacy was affected by the homeowner's hedges?" "Correct. Yes," she said sharply. "And you admitted to authorizing their removal. I improved the community." Then the inspector said, "This falls under the homeowner's right to restore lost privacy." Silence dropped over the yard like the shadow of the container itself. Beatrice shook her head violently. No, you can't allow this. It blocks the sun, it blocks the mountain, it blocks everything." The inspector closed the folder and handed it back to me. "Mrs. Crowley," he said, "state law is clear. A solid privacy barrier up to 32 feet is permitted when natural barriers are removed. Mr. Hale has engineering approval. He is in full compliance." Her mouth fell open, but no sound came out. A few neighbors failed to hide their smiles. One whispered, "Told her she'd push someone too far." Another said, "HOA's done for after this." Beatrice turned to the officers. Arrest him for look at this." One officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, nothing illegal is happening." "But my property value," she cried. "That's not a criminal matter," he replied gently. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto her patio chair, staring up at the rising containers like they were swallowing her existence. Meanwhile, the crane operator waited for my signal. "Go ahead," I said. The final container, orange rust-streaked, dented deep on one side, lifted skyward. It settled into place with a seismic clang, forming a 30-foot wall that blocked her entire world from horizon to roofline. Beatrice let out a thin breaking sound. The inspector scribbled a final note and turned toward the HOA board members in the crowd. "You may want to review leadership conduct," he said. "This situation stems from misuse of authority." It wasn't a suggestion. It was the beginning of her end. As the crane engine faded into a low idle, the neighborhood fell into a stunned quiet. The 3 stacked containers, orange, green, and rust red, rose like a steel cliff behind me, blotting out the sun over Beatrice's patio. The shadow swallowed her backyard, her windows, her balcony, everything she'd fought so hard to expose. But the reaction around us shifted. Neighbors who had crept over earlier now stepped closer cautiously at first, then with a strange mixture of relief and fascination. A few exchanged looks that said what they didn't dare voice. Someone finally stood up to her. Others whispered about how many times she'd fined them, lectured them, threatened them over mailbox colors or porch lights. A man from 2 houses down crossed his arms. "Never thought I'd see the day," he murmured, half smiling. A woman beside him added, "Honestly, it's the first time this place has felt peaceful." I didn't gloat. I just stood there breathing in the silence I hadn't felt since my hedge was alive. The steel wall wasn't beautiful, not by any stretch, but it was solid, final, and entirely mine. Beatrice, however, stared at it like it was the end of the world. The inspector stepped toward her patio, the clipboard still tucked beneath his arm. "Mrs. Crowley," he said, his tone professional but unyielding, "I need to note your authorization of the hedge removal, your use of HOA funds, and your role in initiating improper property modifications." Her head snapped up. "I did what was best for the community. That is not how governance works," he replied. "Misuse of authority is a serious matter." He turned slightly, addressing the small knot of HOA board members who had gathered behind the police vehicles. "I strongly recommend you convene an emergency board meeting to review leadership conduct. This situation began with an unlawful action. The homeowner's structure only exists because his natural barrier was removed without consent." A board member, a quiet man I'd rarely seen speak, nodded. "We'll meet now." Right there in her own backyard, under the shadow of the wall she'd created for herself, the HOA board formed a tight circle. Voices rose and fell. No shouting, just sharp, decisive tones. Beatrice tried to stand, stumbling slightly as she approached them. "You can't do this," she said, voice trembling. "I've been improving Ravenmont Ridge for months, cleaning up, enforcing standards, overreaching," one board member corrected, "violating property rights," another added, "and costing the HOA nearly $2,000 in unauthorized work orders," the treasurer said flatly. Beatrice's jaw quivered. "But my view, my home value, the view is not yours," the treasurer said, "and the consequences are." A moment later, the vote was taken. Quick, clean, unanimous. "Mrs. Crowley," the secretary announced effective immediately, "you are removed as HOA president." Beatrice didn't speak. She simply stared at the ground shoulders, shaking the steel shadow growing colder around her. As the officials began packing up, one officer approached me quietly. "Not gonna lie," he said, "I've never seen a solution like this. Legal and spectacular." I chuckled under my breath. "It's not permanent. I might paint a mural on my side eventually." "What about her side?" he asked. I looked at the raw rust orange, streaking down into dark weathered lines, dense, catching the fading light. "She wanted open views," I said. "Now she gets a reminder instead. I think the rust can stay." The officer nodded like he understood more than he said and returned to his cruiser. Neighbors filtered back to their homes one by one, some with small smiles, some shaking their heads at the absurdity of the morning. But nobody looked upset. Nobody protested. Nobody defended her. For the first time since the hedge was destroyed, the air around my yard felt still, settled, mine again. I walked to the base of the steel wall and touched the cool metal. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't delicate, but it stood immovable, undeniable, a boundary Beatrice could never cross again. Behind me, she sat alone on her patio chair, staring at the towering structure with the hollow look of someone finally meeting the consequences they thought they were too important to face. I didn't say anything to her. Nothing needed to be said. Some people learn through warnings. Some learn through fines. Beatrice learned through a 30-foot wall. And as the last shadow crawled across her balcony, I realized something. Sometimes the only way to get your peace back is to build it yourself.